What happens when the man who signs the paychecks becomes the one mopping the floors? Franklin Adler stood outside the auto shop in a faded gray hoodie, oil-stained jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. He adjusted the fake stubble glued to his jawline and took a deep breath. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the sound of impact wrenches. This was one of 5 auto shops passed down from his father's family run, but now corporate-sized. He hadn't worked a day in one since he was 20. The one he was about to walk into was the 3rd largest store in their chain. He picked it because the last 3 months had shown a dip in customer satisfaction and a strange spike in employee turnover. No one could explain the numbers. Reports said everything was fine. But fine didn't cut it when you own the place. Nobody here had ever met him. When their father passed, Franklin and his brother split duties. Franklin ran the business, his brother stayed public-facing. Employees knew of him but never saw him. That was about to change. He walked in through the employee entrance at the back. The shop manager, a thick-set man with a goatee and a clipboard under his arm, barely looked up. "You the new trainee?" he asked. "Yup, name's Ray." Franklin extended a hand. The manager grunted, didn't shake it. "I'm Todd." "Follow me?" Franklin kept his eyes down and followed Todd through the shop. Engines roared, tires screeched, and the sharp smell of grease clung to everything. Mechanics moved like clockwork, most of them looking tired, too quiet for a place full of machines. Todd led him to a bench near the back. "You'll be shadowing Kyle. You don't touch anything unless he says so. You mess up, it's on him." A young guy in his early 20s approached, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked nervous. "This him?" "Yeah," Todd replied. "Babysit him till he quits or learns something." Then Todd walked off, barking orders at another tech before disappearing into the office. Kyle gave a half smile. "Hey, I'm Kyle. You ever worked in a shop before?" Franklin shook his head. "Nope, but I want to learn." Kyle nodded. "All right. Let's start easy. You'll hand me tools, watch how I do things, and maybe we'll get you on tire rotations by next week." Franklin followed Kyle from bay to bay, watching how he moved, careful, methodical. He always double-checked his work. He explained things as he worked, even when Franklin didn't ask. The kid cared. That much was clear. Around noon, voices raised near the customer waiting area. A woman in her 50s was arguing with a front desk worker. Franklin noticed no one stepped in, not even Todd. The woman stormed out eventually, shaking her head. "What was that about?" Franklin asked as they walked past the desk to grab parts. Kyle lowered his voice. "That's been happening more lately. They overcharge or push stuff people don't need. If a customer argues, they just let him leave." Franklin clenched his jaw but said nothing. One day in, and he already saw cracks. Later that afternoon, a new trainee came in, thin, nervous, maybe 18. Her name was Priscilla Vargas. She wore a uniform that didn't quite fit and clutched a clipboard like a shield. Todd introduced her with an eye roll and told her to shadow Kyle too. "2 rookies? Great," Kyle muttered but gave her a smile. "All right, let's make it work." Priscilla was quiet but asked good questions. She listened. Franklin noticed she flinched every time Todd walked by. Something was off. By 4, the shop was winding down. Franklin was sweeping near the back when he heard Todd's voice, low and sharp. "You think we're running a daycare here?" Todd hissed. "You screw up again, I swear, I'll send you home crying." "You're not cut out for this, sweetheart." Franklin froze. He peeked around the corner. Todd stood inches from Priscilla, jabbing a finger at her chest. She didn't say anything, just stared at the ground. I asked Kyle what to do before she started." "Don't talk back," Todd snapped. "I don't care what Kyle said. If I say jump, you jump. Got it?" Franklin's heart pounded. Kyle stepped in. "Todd, shut it, Kyle. You want to babysit her, fine, but next time she messes up, it's on you. And you, little Miss Mechanic," he turned back to Priscilla. "You won't last a week here if you keep acting like some scared little girl." Franklin's hands tightened around the broom. He took a breath, forced himself to walk past like he hadn't heard a thing. But inside, he felt sick. He hadn't expected this. Harsh words, maybe, but this? Threats, he found a quiet spot behind the stacks of tires and leaned against the wall. His stomach turned. His dad built this company on grit and respect. What had it turned into? That night, Franklin sat in his motel room staring at the ceiling. He couldn't shake Priscilla's face, couldn't shake Todd's voice. All the spreadsheets in the world couldn't show him what he saw today. He stayed up until 2 planning tomorrow he'd work again. Watch more. But soon, very soon, things were going to change, and when they did, Todd wouldn't see it coming. Franklin arrived earlier the next morning, before the sun had fully crested the horizon. The shop lights flickered on one by one, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. He sat silently on an overturned crate near Bay 5, nursing a burnt coffee from the vending machine. The place felt colder than it had the day before, and not just in temperature. The silence before the day's noise began had a weight to it. Kyle showed up 15 minutes later, rubbing sleep from his eyes, hoodie zipped to his chin. He gave Franklin a quick nod. "You always this early?" Kyle asked, setting down his tool bag. "Just wanted to get a feel for the place before it gets loud," Franklin replied. "You'll get enough of that in about 10 minutes, Kyle muttered, cracking his knuckles. "We've got 3 oil changes before lunch and Todd's already on edge, payroll delay or something." Franklin kept his expression neutral. "How often do they delay payroll here?" "Twice in the last 4 months, Kyle said, too tired to filter. "It always gets sorted out, but nobody says anything until it's already late. You get used to it if you stay long enough." A few more techs trickled in quiet, heads down, shoulders hunched like men preparing for a storm. None of them looked each other in the eye. No jokes, no music, just the low hum of fluorescent lights and the faint hiss of pneumatic lines pressurizing. Priscilla arrived last, stepping through the back door with her notepad clutched tight to her chest. Her boots were untied and she looked like she hadn't slept. One of the older techs glanced at her, then looked away without a word. Kyle walked over and spoke softly to her. She nodded, then followed him to Bay 3. Franklin trailed behind, hands in his pockets. "She didn't clock out properly yesterday," Kyle whispered to Franklin as they walked. "Todd told her it had come out of her next check. She was already crying when I found her at the bus stop." Franklin didn't respond. He couldn't. His jaw ached from holding his mouth shut. By late morning, the floor was a blur of moving parts. The 3 of them rotated through cars. A worn-out Civic with a cracked serpentine belt, a minivan that needed new brake pads, and a Dodge truck with a transmission that whined like a dying animal. Kyle took the lead on each job, narrating steps without being condescending. He gave Priscilla space to try things, correcting her gently when she slipped. Franklin mostly watched, handed over tools, and asked just enough questions to pass as curious but not suspicious. During a break between customers, they sat behind the shop on a concrete step. Kyle lit a cigarette, shielding it from the wind with one hand. "You got family here?" he asked Franklin. "No, just me," Kyle exhaled. "You're lucky, my brother works up in Denton. He's a tech too, but he jumped over to a dealership. Better pay, better tools. They give lunch vouchers if you can believe that. You thinking of leaving?" "Sometimes. But I've got rent and I'd need to buy all new tools if I went somewhere else. Most of these," he gestured toward a nearby rolling toolbox, "belong to the shop. I can't afford to replace them." Franklin nodded slowly. "Seems like the turnover here's high. We lost 2 guys last month. One got a job with the city, the other just stopped showing up." Kyle took another drag. "Can't blame him, the work's fine. It's everything else that wears you down." They were interrupted by the sound of metal clattering inside. A voice snapped Todd's. Franklin stood immediately. Inside, Priscilla stood by Bay 4, holding a torque wrench with both hands. A red Ford Fusion sat on the lift, its rear wheel half-mounted. Todd loomed over her, fury on his face. "I told you torque the lugs in sequence, not random order. What do you think happens if someone crashes because of you?" I was trying to remember the pattern. "You're not here to try, you're here to do what you're told. If you can't handle simple instructions, walk out that door." Franklin stepped forward, but Kyle grabbed his arm lightly, shaking his head. Priscilla looked frozen, eyes wide, wrench still in hand. Todd let the silence hang there, thick and deliberate. Then he snatched the wrench from her and dropped it on the tool cart with a clang. "Put the wheel back on right, and if you mess up again, don't come back tomorrow." He turned and stormed toward the office. Priscilla didn't move for several seconds. Then she slowly bent and began the job again, her hands trembling. "Does that happen often?" Franklin whispered. Kyle hesitated. "Only when no one else is around, and even then most people pretend they didn't hear it." Franklin helped her finish the job. He didn't say anything while they worked. He handed her the torque wrench when she needed it, and she gave him a silent nod when it was done. The rest of the day passed like a long exhale. A customer came in complaining about a brake job from 2 weeks ago. Todd spent 5 minutes insisting it must have been driver error before offering a partial refund. Kyle later told Franklin the refund would come out of the shop's bonus pool. Around 5, as they were closing up, Franklin noticed a clipboard on the front counter. It had a list of names and hours. Some had been crossed out. Others had handwritten corrections next to them. He recognized the names 2 of the techs who hadn't been in today. He turned to the receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes and a phone pressed to her shoulder. "What's this?" he asked, gesturing to the clipboard. "Payroll edits," she said, not looking up. "Todd said he had to fix some entries. Happens every week." Franklin scanned the list. Some employees had over 10 hours shaved off. Others were missing entire days. A tight knot formed in his chest. He didn't speak. He just nodded and walked slowly back to the garage. As he passed Bay 2, he spotted Kyle packing up. "Hey," Franklin said, lowering his voice. "You ever look at your pay stubs closely?" Kyle frowned. "Why?" "Just wondering, might be worth checking." Kyle studied him for a second. "You see something I should know?" Franklin paused. "Just look at your last 3 paychecks. Compare 'em to your hours." Kyle didn't ask more. He just nodded once and returned to his tools. That night, Franklin parked his rental car outside a fast food place across the street from the shop. He sat in the driver's seat, watching the building slowly go dark. One by one, the lights shut off. Eventually, silence settled over the lot. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Hey," he said when the line picked up. "It's Franklin. I need you to audit something for me, quietly. I've got a feeling we're being robbed from the inside." He hung up and stared out at the shop. He saw it now, clear as day. The broken parts weren't just metal and bolts, they were people, and they'd been ignored for too long. Franklin parked in the same back corner of the lot the next morning, cutting the headlights early and sitting in silence. The windshield was fogged around the edges, and a half-eaten sandwich from the night before sat forgotten on the passenger seat. He hadn't slept well, not after the call he got just before midnight. His accountant had quietly reviewed the payroll records for the last 6 months at this location. The discrepancies weren't small, they were systemic, hours altered, overtime erased, bonuses withheld. It was theft. Not just from the business, but from the people who made it run. And the worst part? It was being done by someone in the building. He stepped out of the car and walked toward the service bay entrance. The sun hadn't risen yet, but the first shift was already arriving. Kyle pulled in on foot from the bus stop, rubbing his hands together, his hoodie damp at the sleeves. He noticed Franklin and walked over. "You were right," Kyle said without preamble. "I looked last night. I'm short at least 15 hours this month and last month." "It's worse." Franklin nodded once. "Did you talk to anyone else?" "I mentioned it to Layla. She's missing time too. Said when she brought it up before, Todd told her she must have forgotten to clock in." Franklin's voice was low. "You think people are scared to speak up?" Kyle didn't hesitate. "Of course they are. If you get labeled as a problem here, you don't last. People need these jobs. We don't exactly have other offers lined up." Franklin looked toward the building. "You ever seen the actual time logs, the raw data?" Kyle shook his head. "Only Todd has access. That sealed it." They walked in together. Franklin peeled off near the tool racks to keep up the act, but his mind was moving fast. He needed one more day, Just one more to document everything. Then he'd act. By mid-morning, the tension in the shop had shifted. Layla, a wiry mechanic with burned scars on her forearms and tired eyes, cornered Franklin near the parts cabinet. "You're Ray, right?" she asked, voice hushed. He nodded. "You asked Kyle about hours. You looking into something?" Franklin didn't answer right away. Then quietly, "I'm just trying to understand what's happening." She glanced around. "They cut my hours twice. I've been here almost 7 years. When I pushed back, Todd said I was lucky to still have a job." Franklin kept his face neutral. "You ever go above him?" "To who? Nobody listens." "I sent an email once to corporate. Nothing changed. Got written up 2 days later for insubordination." She walked off before he could say more. Franklin spent lunchtime outside, sitting on the curb beside the dumpster, pretending to eat while watching Todd through the breakroom window. He was laughing with someone on the phone, feet kicked up on the desk, clipboard balanced on his knee. The same clipboard Franklin had seen the altered timesheets on. He waited. Watched. Then, just before the end of the day, it happened. A customer stormed in through the front doors, red-faced and holding a dented receipt. "This says I paid for a tire rotation. I didn't get one. Your guy said he'd do it, and now I've got uneven wear on the left side." Todd didn't get up from his chair. "Sir, if it's not on the work order, it didn't happen." The man pointed at the receipt. "It's right here, itemized, $45. That's a mistake, we'll refund it." "I don't want a refund, I want the service I paid for." Todd shrugged. "We're booked solid." "Come back next week." "What kind of operation is this?" Todd stood. "Sir, if you want to keep yelling, I'll have to ask you to leave." Franklin stepped forward. "I can take care of it." Todd turned, surprised. "You're a trainee." "Stay out of it. I know how to rotate tires." Todd took a step closer. "You touch that car, you're done here." Franklin held his gaze. "Then fire me." The room went still. Todd's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. The customer blinked, uncertain. Franklin turned to him. "Pull into Bay 4. I'll take care of it right now. No charge." The man hesitated, then walked out. Todd didn't move. He just watched Franklin disappear into the bay. That evening, Franklin waited until the shop was empty. He slipped into the front office, careful not to disturb anything. The desk drawer was unlocked. Inside, he found the clipboard. The sheets were as bad as he remembered. Notes in Todd's handwriting, crossing off hours, adjusting totals, writing "forgot to clock in" beside names. He took photos of every page. Then he opened the computer. The login was saved. Todd hadn't even bothered to log out. Franklin pulled up the timecard software. There it was, a log of edits. Every change attached to Todd's username. Dozens of them. He copied the files onto a flash drive from his coat pocket and slipped it back into place. The next morning, he didn't put on the overalls. He walked in wearing a black button-up shirt and slacks, no cap, no stubble, just himself. Most of the crew looked up, confused. Kyle stared. "Ray," Franklin looked him in the eye. "My name's Franklin Adler. I own this shop." Silence hit the room like a dropped wrench. Todd stepped out of the office, mouth open. "What the hell's going on?" Franklin turned to him. "You've been altering timecards, withholding pay, threatening employees, and you've been doing it for months." Todd's face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about. I have the logs, the photos, the payroll records. You're done here." Todd's voice rose. "You think you can just walk in here and pull rank? I run this place. I've kept it afloat while you sat in a high rise somewhere. You stole from these people. You threatened them, you mocked customers, you've embarrassed this company and everything it's supposed to stand for." Kyle stepped forward. "He's telling the truth. I checked my own hours. So did Layla. We've all seen it." Layla nodded from across the room. "I've got screenshots, emails." "He's been skimming for years." Todd looked around. The crew had gathered quietly. Not one spoke in his defense. Franklin pointed toward the door. "Leave, now." Todd didn't argue. He grabbed his coat, stormed past the bays, and slammed the door behind him. Outside, the early morning sun lit up the street. Inside, nobody said anything for a long time. Then Layla spoke. "What happens now?" Franklin looked at her, then at the rest of the crew. "Now we fix this. Together." He walked over to the wall and tore down the faded, crooked poster that read "Every minute counts." Underneath it, the paint was cleaner, less worn. "We start by listening and making sure none of this ever happens again." Kyle exhaled slowly. "You're really the owner," Franklin smiled. "Yeah, and I've got a lot of catching up to do." Franklin arrived at the shop the next morning in the same black shirt and slacks, carrying a battered clipboard and a folder under one arm. He didn't use the back entrance this time. He walked through the front door just after 6, before the garage lights had fully warmed up. A few mechanics were already inside, setting up for the day. They looked up but didn't speak, waiting to see what he'd do next. He nodded once and stepped through the service hallway, stopping at the open bay where Kyle stood prepping his station. Kyle didn't say anything right away. He just wiped his hands on a rag and looked over with a quiet kind of focus, like someone who'd stayed up all night thinking about what would happen when the sun came up. Franklin held out the folder. "These are your full payroll records for the last 6 months. I've already filed the corrections. Back pay will land by next Friday." Kyle took the folder, flipped through the pages, and paused. "You did this already?" "I stayed late last night, got the numbers from Central. Had to cut 2 bonus initiatives, but we'll make it work for now." Kyle closed the folder and set it on the workbench. "You didn't have to do that yourself." "Yes, I did." Franklin turned to the rest of the bay. "Can I get everyone for 15 minutes? I'll make it quick. Just need the floor quiet for a bit." They gathered slowly, some leaning against lifts, others folding their arms. Layla stood near the back with her coat still on. Priscilla lingered near the tool cages, her eyes down. No one looked relaxed. Franklin stood in the center of the floor and set the clipboard on a rolling cart. "I know I came in here pretending to be someone I'm not. I know that makes it hard to trust me, but I did it because second-hand reports weren't telling me what I needed to know." He paced once between 2 bays, careful not to raise his voice. "What I saw in here, what I let happen without stepping in sooner, is on me. I can't take back what you've been through, but I can change what happens next." No one interrupted. A few glanced at each other, waiting for the catch. "I've made some decisions. They're not temporary fixes, they're structural." He pulled a sheet from the clipboard. "First, hours. From this point forward, all time cards will be managed through a third-party system. Nobody here will have edit access. I've already signed the contract. You'll be able to see your hours live, track changes, and report discrepancies directly to my office." That got a reaction. Layla crossed her arms tighter, but her jaw eased. One of the newer techs muttered under his breath. Priscilla raised her head slightly. "Second, we're putting in an anonymous reporting channel. It goes straight to someone outside our HR department. You report an issue: harassment, pay, safety. It gets logged, time-stamped, and investigated within 72 hours. No exceptions." Kyle nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Third, the bonus pool. It's been mismanaged. Starting next quarter, we're tying bonuses directly to team performance metrics, not just revenue, but customer satisfaction, safety, compliance, and retention. If the shop does well, everyone benefits." A few murmurs moved through the group, low and cautious. "And finally," Franklin looked around, meeting eyes where he could, "we're bringing in a new floor supervisor, someone from outside this location. Interviews start next week. Until then, I'll be here daily running oversight, not from the office, from the floor." Layla spoke for the first time. "You mean actually working?" "Yes, gear on, wrench in hand." She raised an eyebrow. "You know how to do more than sweep." "I used to. I'll need a refresher." Laughter broke, short and uneven, but it loosened the edge in the room. A little. Franklin turned to Priscilla. "You're owed an apology." "From leadership, from me?" She looked up, startled. "You don't have to, I do." He stepped forward, not close enough to crowd her, but enough that she didn't have to raise her voice. "You were mistreated under this roof. That shouldn't happen anywhere, but especially not here. I saw it. I didn't stop it in that moment. I won't make that mistake again." She nodded, eyes glassy but dry. He turned back to the full group. "We're short-staffed, and I won't pretend that's going to change overnight. But starting Monday, we're bringing in a training coordinator from our Denton location. She's one of our best. She'll be here to support new hires and make sure none of you are left carrying double the load without help. Kyle raised a hand. What about tools? A couple of us are using shared sets because we can't afford replacements. Franklin nodded. I've authorized a one-time equipment stipend. It's not huge, but it'll cover basics. The long-term plan is to transition into a tool ownership program company helps you buy. You pay it off over time, interest-free. No one asked follow-ups. They just listened, the kind of listening that came from people too used to disappointment to get their hopes up yet. Franklin closed the clipboard and set it down. This was never supposed to be a place people feared coming to. That falls on me. If you give me the chance, I'll earn your trust back. Not with promises, with action. The meeting broke naturally, people drifting back to work without being told. Franklin didn't stop them. He just grabbed a rag and headed toward Bay 1. Kyle caught up with him at the air compressor. You serious about staying on the floor? I brought my own gloves. Kyle laughed once genuine this time. Then you can start with the Tahoe in Bay 2, needs a water pump and a belt tensioner. Franklin nodded. Show me where you keep the gasket scraper. By mid-afternoon, he had grease under his nails, calluses forming where his fingers hadn't gripped a wrench in decades, and a faint ache between his shoulder blades. He hadn't touched an engine since his early 20s. Everything felt slower. But it was real. When he stepped into the break room near closing, Priscilla was sitting alone with a half-eaten sandwich and a tattered guidebook on engine diagnostics. She looked up with a cautious glance when he sat across from her. You sticking with it? He asked. I don't know. She closed the book. I like the work, just wasn't what I expected. You expecting it to be easier? No, I was expecting someone to have my back. Franklin nodded slowly. You still might not right away. But I promise you this, if someone doesn't, they'll answer for it. Her voice was quiet. Why'd you come here yourself? Because I forgot what it was like to be on the floor. I started thinking in balance sheets and forgot there were people behind every number. She didn't respond. But she didn't leave either. That evening, Franklin locked up the shop himself. The floor was clean. Tools were finally back where they belonged. The silence felt different now, less heavy, more earned. Outside, the sky was dark and the streetlights buzzed faintly overhead. He paused beside the rental car and looked back at the building. The windows glowed soft in the office, the last to shut down. He didn't feel finished. He felt responsible. And finally, he felt present.